Hi, I'm Jabzy for the Armchair Historian. In 1848, revolution swept across Europe, and in Italy rebels rose up in Sicily, Rome, and Austrian-controlled Venice and Milan. Charles Albert, the King of Piedmont Sardinia, tried to exploit this and looked to annex Venice and Milan. However, he was defeated by the Austrians and forced to abdicate in favour of his son Victor Emmanuel II. The rebellions were then crushed, and in Rome the French sent troops to restore Pope Pius to power and maintained a garrison there. But Victor Emmanuel learned that he had to gain foreign support for any future wars of unification, so he and his Prime Minister Cavour agreed to join the Crimean War against Russia, hoping to gain favour with France and Britain. This help wasn't immediately forthcoming, but in January 1858 an Italian nationalist, Felice Orsini, tried to assassinate Napoleon III of France. He became convinced that to stop any further revolutionary activity like this, he should aid the Italian unification effort. So at Plombières he met with Cavour and promised to aid in a war against Austria if Piedmont was attacked. In exchange, Piedmont would hand over Nice and Savoy. However, because French assistance would only be provided if Austria attacked first, Cavour had to provoke it. So he began to conduct military manoeuvres along the border. On the 23rd of April 1859, the Austrians demanded that they demobilise, but this was rejected, and so the war was declared on the 29th. The Austrians, looking for a quick victory, used newly built railroads to ship men to the front. However, temporary delays were made worsened by heavy rains, and the Piedmontese flooded the rice fields. And in mid-May, Napoleon III arrived and defeated the Austrians at Montebello. The Austrians, on the other hand, were poorly led by July, and Napoleon was able to cross the Ticino River, outflank them, and despite being heavily outnumbered, defeat the Austrians at Magenta in early June. So July was relieved of his duties, and Emperor Franz Joseph took personal command of the forces, and he fell back to the Quadrilateral, a fortified zone based around 4 cities in northern Italy. Milan was therefore free to be taken, while to the north Giuseppe Garibaldi led his Hunters of the Alps and defeated small Austrian forces at Como and Varese. Yet in the central Italian states, which were under Austrian influence, protests erupted in Tuscany, Parma, Modena, and even in cities in the Papal States like Bologna. And with the help of Piedmontese forces, they forced their respective leaders to flee. But the French had to stop their advance at Brescia, so Franz Joseph launched a counterattack and the two armies met at Solferino in late June. This was the last battle where two monarchs would lead their armies into the field, and as both had around 130,000 men each, one of the largest battles since the Napoleonic Wars. The French emerged victorious, however Napoleon refused to accept further losses, as he feared the growing Prussian threat and their possible involvement, so he signed the Treaty of Villafranca in July. Austria ceded most of Lombardy to the French, and they straightaway handed it to Piedmont. However, in the central states they also held elections, and united to form the United Provinces. However, the Piedmontese still occupied the states. However, before the war, Napoleon did promise to give Piedmont Lombardy and Venice in exchange for Savoy and Nice. But as the French only gave them Lombardy, they had to come to a new agreement, and they signed the Treaty of Turin in 1860. Here they agreed that plebiscites would be held in Nice and Savoy, which were granted to France, in exchange for Victor Emmanuel holding plebiscites in the central provinces, where they voted and possibly rigged elections to join Piedmont. However, Garibaldi, a native of Nice, was angered by his city becoming French, and he would launch his attack on the south in May 1860, uniting most of the peninsula.